Hey gamers, did you know that turn-based combat is bad unless it's Nintendo or Persona 5? It's an outdated system, and anyone who likes it probably sat on the floor during a non-zero amount of high school lunch periods. Any RPG that has you actually fight your enemies instead of trying to do some geometry is better for it, which is why we're talking about Drakengard. Drakengard, or Doki Doki Panic in Japanese, was released on some uneventful day in 2003 and would later go on to be connected to no notable games whatsoever. It's a game that inspires only the most normal of emotions from people who play it. And since I, the YouTuber who has publicly admitted to sitting on the floor for a non-zero amount of high school lunch periods in at least 2 videos, am all about normal emotions, I was naturally attracted to this game. It's decently common knowledge that Drakengard is a reaction to the Dynasty Warriors series, and more broadly, the general idea of violence in video games. When the topic of violent video games comes up, it's usually your Mortal Kombats and your Grand Theft Autos, games where the core appeal is the shock of how violent your actions are, as well as the fact that you're playing as an objectively terrible person. The playable cast of Dynasty Warriors, on the other hand, consists of real figures from a specific era of Chinese history, but overly romanticized in an individualist great man theory kind of way. And like, no shit, it's based on Romance of the Three Kingdoms, which already took quite a bit of creative liberties with its source material. But the 3 layers of abstraction from actual history means the real-life child murderer now has the personality of a shonen protagonist. Dynasty Warriors' approach to violence is pretty casual. You destroy countless nameless mooks without so much as a drop of blood. We lose sales if we went over a T rating. The games give you text pop-ups for every time you reach a certain threshold of people killed, but your mass murder isn't treated like an event.
ちょっと冷静に考えると100人人を殺して自慢するっていうのはちょっと僕正直感性としておかしいなと思って殺人鬼ですよね 100人殺したらその狂気の沙汰だって思ったんです。
This isn't meant to be a your fave is problematic type thing or shame anyone for liking Dynasty Warriors, since I get the series is common use as a form of stress relief, and if anything, I'm more concerned with the treatment of women. Rather, this is meant to convey how casually violence is portrayed in even video games without much gore, how there's a juxtaposition between the excessiveness of the character's actions and the nonchalance of the player's inputs. And this juxtaposition is the base of Drakengard's ideas. You are Caim, a recently orphaned prince on a quest to stop the evil empire invading his kingdom. He's a really nice guy who's on a vegan diet because he loves taking care of animals that much.
Empire rats, you shall feed the ravens.
He then gets wounded and is only able to heal himself by making a pact with a dragon, a being that he hates because of one being responsible for the recent orphaning in question, thus trading his ability to speak in exchange for greater power. And so, the whole point of the game is that you're in control of an overly violent character. In the on-the-ground sections, enemies are generally passive, and the combination of the lack of variety and high hit stun in Caim's attacks means they'll usually get dispatched with little to no thought. Now, you might be wondering why I would be praising a game where all you do is mindlessly stun lock enemies to death. To that I say, what a weird question to ask when this isn't a video about Xenoblade 1. But in all seriousness, I find Drakengard's reputation for being some uniquely tedious game to be mostly unfounded. The level design and increased mobility you get from calling your dragon mean that so long as you know which targets to prioritize, be it ones necessary for the mission or ones that can send you to the ground, you should be able to finish levels at a good pace. And while the game doesn't explain this, there's a legitimately clever system where outside of 1 or 2 chests per level, you can only get healing items from extending a combo to a certain length. As such, you're encouraged to play aggressively, keeping the combo going and catching as many enemies as possible in each sword swing, all the while making sure you don't get attacked yourself. Don't get me wrong, an element of tedium undeniably exists in Drakengard, as that's ultimately part of what the game wants to convey. However, another part of that is this sick pleasure to be found in optimizing the seemingly daunting task put in front of you and playing the role of a horrifying mass murderer. There's also the sections where you fly on your dragon. They're more typical of the conventions of their respective genre than the on-the-ground sections and take up a lesser portion of the game's runtime, so they tend to not really stand out as much. This is probably why a substantial portion of discussion on Drakengard tends to position these sections as the better part of the game, although I disagree. I find them fine enough, not really offering anything unique in comparison to what the on-the-ground sections are doing for action games, but paced well enough to never overstay their welcome and benefiting from Drakengard's many non non-mechanical strengths. Namely, the PS2 aesthetic, or really any 5th or 6th generation console aesthetic, is gorgeous, and if you've ever used the phrase looks like a PS2 game as an insult for anything, you're just full of shit. It represents a median point where the technology to make 3D games is still new enough to require some degree of experimentation, but is also established enough for a greater variety of graphical tricks to be possible. Drakengard in particular conveys this foreboding miasma through its color choices and overall hazy look, creating the impression that this world is not bound to last. And the soundtrack is... well, it's certainly something. I really could not tell you the first thing about music composition, but Drakengard's OST is auditorily unpleasant in a way that few game soundtracks would ever try to achieve. Rather than say Sonic Chronicles' infamous soundtrack, it's in a way that complements what the game is going for, as it captures the despair of the game's world and how well-adjusted Caim is. There's a genuine sense of purpose behind it that's best exemplified by the various samples and subsequent distortions of famous classical pieces. It comes full circle to the idea of the warping of the overly romanticized, the idea that Drakengard is built on. And the biggest application of this is the game's character writing. Characters tend to represent simple fantasy archetypes. Your dragon is the animal companion. Inuart is the best friend / party member turned rival popularized in RPGs by Final Fantasy IV's Cain Highwind. Vertile is the allied priest typical to medieval fantasy's reactionary praise of religious institutions. And Furii is the damsel in distress. Few, if any, characters in the game experience actual development beyond what is expected of their archetype. But while the character writing is simple, that doesn't exactly mean that what you see is what you get. These characters all have some severe moral failing as a twist on their respective archetype. The Red Dragon has a hatred of humanity mirroring Caim's hatred of dragons, and her dialogue is the best example of this blunt cynicism to the game's prose that I love.
Wise men choose death for the good. Wiser men choose not to.
Inuart's obsessive desire for Furii causes him to get possessed and trade away his artistic pursuit of choice to hand over the woman he claims to love to the Empire. Vertile is one of the only two characters who you can maybe call a semi-decent human being, but there is still some degree of hypocrisy to him, as he constantly preaches against Caim's violence while still ultimately going along with it. And the seclusion forced upon Furii because of her status as a goddess has sparked feelings for her own brother that result in her dying by her own hand upon finding out said love is thankfully unrequited. Now's as good a time as any to say that Drakengard is edgy in many regards, be it the use of taboo subjects or the presence of some of the fantasy genre's more reactionary elements. While that is an aspect of Drakengard I can't exactly fault anyone for being skeptical of, given how dark fantasy doesn't exactly have the best track record on that front, it is ultimately part of what makes Drakengard Drakengard. Drakengard's world is a pastiche of medieval fantasy, the stock plot of a smaller kingdom versus a larger empire, the map that's literally just upside down Europe, or the extremely unoriginal decision to name the continent the game takes place on after the Norse Midgard. However, this is very much a deliberate decision, and when put in the context of the rest of the game, it's meant to get us to ask questions about the genre. This shouldn't completely absolve Drakengard of any serious criticism, especially when it comes to issues relating to marginalized groups I'm not a part of. There is even one particular character I haven't mentioned yet who I have quite a bit of gripes with. Rather, this is to say that these issues are the result of Drakengard holding up a mirror to the fantasy genre and asking us to stare intently, making it an auto-critique of those less than savory elements in ways both intended and not. Anyways, with Furii's death, the last seal breaks, causing the sky to turn red as the world erupts into chaos. Caim and the dragon find the leader of the Empire, a little girl named Mana who's possessed by some unseen higher power, and defeat her, sparing her and forcing her to live out the rest of her days with the knowledge of the crimes she was responsible for in her prior state. But in order to renew the seal broken with Furii's death, the dragon volunteers to become the new goddess. And in one seemingly uncharacteristic act of respect for the species she once despised, she finally says her name.
Angelus. My name is Angelus. You are the first and the last of your kind to know my name.
Thus concludes Drakengard, a story filled with constant hardships and displays of humanity's worst qualities that ends in one small, bittersweet moment of respite. But then the game dangles something in front of you. 4 more endings to unlock. With how many things went wrong over the course of the story and how many loose threads there should surely be some way to get a truly happy ending. Endings B and C are unlocked by exceeding a certain amount of damage to Inouye within a certain time span. In B, Furia is revived in an inhuman form and must be killed, while in C, the pact between Caim and Angelus breaks, forcing them to fight each other. And both conclude on the same note, with humanity at war with countless beings exactly like the one you just fought, forcing Caim into action yet again. Only 2 chances for a happy ending left. Ending D is unlocked by finding and completing side stories within pre-existing chapters. While the game's menu for accessing missions is structured in a form reminiscent of a storybook, these side stories seem to defy that. When you try to place them in chronological order, they actively contradict both themselves and the main story, as if you're trying to cause something that should not have happened. Moreover, while Caim's violence was already cruel to an extent beyond what is necessary, the first of these 3 stories sees them killing children forced to enlist in the Empire against their will, a completely unjustifiable act to a greater extent than anything seen before. Within these 3 stories, Caim meets 3 other pack members and joins up with them. Ariok is a child cannibal who I don't really have much to say about beyond the general idea of Caim's group not exactly being good people and also me finding her funny. Leonard is one of those people leaving comments on my mid-Danganronpa video. He feels guilt for his urges after his decision to act on them inadvertently causes the deaths of his family members, and in theory, he could have offered an interesting showcase of Caim sinking so low that a perpetrator of one of the biggest taboos imaginable is still more moral. However, he ends up as the messiest handled part of the game because the specific thing he's painted as the voice of reason on is Caim's aforementioned child murder. This already doesn't exactly come off the best for the obvious reason of him being a member of several Omori discords, but it's also just a role that Vertile and Angelus already serve, making him feel redundant. Sarai is the most important of the 3. He gave up his ability to age in a pact with a golem and is now searching for his sister, who happens to be Mana. Should Caim actively turn his back on Furia in order to quench his bloodthirst even more, Sarai will reunite with Mana. He tries to reason with her, only to eventually just have his pact partner kill her, an act that angers the Eldritch beings controlling her and causes them to descend upon the capital. With their strong projectiles and ability to attack you mid-combo, fighting these grotesqueries in combat proves to be a fruitless endeavor. But as one last-ditch effort, Sarai comes up with an idea. Inspired by the Little Hero, a story of legend he sees himself in, he uses a specific condition of his pact to freeze the area in time, ending the game with one haunting final shot and the credits theme simulating the sound of clocks. The Little Hero is the final stake plunged into the heart of the coffin Drakengard has built for the romanticism of both the series it takes from mechanically and the genre it takes from narratively. The supposed defeat of the grotesqueries through an obsession with a fictional story ultimately didn't solve anything. It serves as a condemnation of those who use escapism through fiction as an excuse to turn away from the world's problems, freezing themselves in non-existent lore and never growing up, as they pay no mind to the suffering of others. There's also a clear juxtaposition between Caim's role in the scene and the Little Hero, as the former's death happens off-screen, only indicated by his absence from Angelus's back and the dropping of his sword. As an active refutation of the Little Hero's romanticized ideals, the supposed hero of the story has met his demise completely unceremoniously, reduced to no more than any of the nameless people who would have died in this event as well. More damning, though, is the fact that the Little Hero was what caused the game's main conflict to happen in the first place. As stated earlier, Sarai and Mana are part of the same family, but what I haven't mentioned was how their mother plays into this. From what can be pieced together through various lines of dialogue, she was obsessed with the narrative of the Little Hero and saw Sarai in it, choosing him as a favorite child and neglecting, if not actively abusing, Mana. This in turn warped Mana's emotional state and her view of what love is, making her a prime target for the grotesqueries' possession and consequently the leader of the Cult of the Watchers, thus resulting in the Empire's attack on the goddess. And so ends Drakengard, a warning against false ideals of heroism, be it fictional characters or real historical figures. It's what I would have said if there wasn't still one final ending left. Full disclosure, at least as of scripting, I have not gotten this ending myself, but that is something very intentional on the part of those working on the game. The unlock criteria is to collect all 65 weapons in the game through various optional challenges, a daunting task for sure. The sheer quantity of these weapons requires you to commit a ridiculous amount of time to collecting them, and the lack of explanation for how to obtain them necessitates going online and tearing away any possible sense of discovery. The chapter unlocked by doing this involves Caim and Angelus taking the Queen Beast to Japan and battling it there. It represents a point where the player's harvesting of games for content has become unhealthy enough to bleed into their real-life existence, breaching the realm of the game. I'm sure that this ending's reputation as a joke inspired by End of Eva is going to cause people to think that I'm looking way too deep into this, but 1. Art with a humorous slant can still convey messages and be particularly skilled at doing so in many ways, and 2. I sure do wonder what the message of Evangelion was. But with everything said and done, why care about Drakengard? Why care about a game so intent on cynically telling you that nothing matters and there is no hope? Well, does any video game matter really? For as much of a dick measuring contest games are traded as, there isn't much to be gained from, say, actively training to be the best at a game, immersing yourself in the lore of a game's world, or analyzing the inner workings of games in depth. And I think the way Drakengard is transparent about this fact is why it always seems to resonate so deeply with those who play it, positively or negatively. I'm of the belief that the only true optimists are those who are willing to see all the horrible shit in our world and still press on, rather than those who bear a false sense of optimism and their ability to ignore said horrible shit. Drakengard is a challenge to have that true optimism regardless of how bleak its world might seem. A challenge to find meaning in a world so intent on telling you that everything is meaningless. For as meaningless as video games are in a vacuum, that doesn't mean they haven't accomplished anything. Being the vehicle for important messages, raising money for great causes, or even something as simple as being the piece of flint that sparked a meaningful friendship. Drakengard wants you to prove that the acts of monotonous violence you committed throughout its runtime were for something more than just mindless little blips on your dopamine receptors. And it wants you to find out what that something is on your own. For as much as I love this medium, and I'm sure you do as well, it will always be important to have a Drakengard, or an Undertale, or a Mother's 3, or an MGS2 there to tell us something we all really need to hear. Go outside!